Today I'll be presenting on motivated behavior in poultry. These are the 5 domains of animal welfare. As you can see, nutrition, environment, health, and behavior all contribute to an animal's mental state, which determines how it perceives its own quality of life and therefore its welfare. However, you may notice that behavior is a little different than the others. While nutrition, environment, and health are all results of inputs by human caretakers, behavior is something that's performed by the animal itself. So with this in mind, it brings up the question, behavior is considered a domain of welfare, but why? As a side note, today I'll be discussing the effect of behavior on welfare. The relationship can also go the other direction, with welfare status impacting behavior, but that's outside the scope today. If you're interested in that, there's lots of great articles on the Peck Poultry Press website that I recommend you check out. Behavior is a domain of welfare because performing natural behavior matters to poultry. During the evolutionary history of the ancestors of most common poultry species, certain behaviors may have helped promote survival. These behaviors would help the animals find food, shelter, water, and mates to pass down their genes. So naturally, these behaviors would become more prevalent in the populations as they developed. And one way for evolution to ensure that these behaviors continued to propagate in the population was the development of motivational systems. While behaviors can be triggered through learning, through environmental cues, they can also be generated by internal desires, which is what is known as an intrinsic motivation. Essentially, even in the absence of a proper environmental cue or a learned trigger, an animal can feel a desire to perform a certain behavior. These desires and associations can be strengthened through the incorporation of emotion in the motivational system. So performance of the behavior will feel good to the animal, while not being able to perform the behavior feels bad. As animals will want to do things that feel good and avoid things that feel bad, this ensures that these survival important behaviors continue to be performed by this species. This is how motivated behaviors affect welfare. Because the animal experiences an emotion in relation to the behavior, it can change how they experience their quality of life. However, while these behavioral motivations developed in the wild ancestors of most poultry species, these behavioral motivations still persist in modern-day captive varieties. While survival needs that these behaviors are intended to meet for food, for water, for shelter, and for safety are addressed by human caretakers in these captive environments, the animals still demonstrate these behaviors. This is one of the indicators that we can use as scientists to detect which behaviors are intrinsically motivated. This is called persistence, that the behavior is still performed when the need it fulfills is already met. Essentially, this rules out the possibility that the behavior is performed solely in response to a physiological drive such as hunger or thirst. The second indicator we can use is vacuum behavior. This is behavior that is performed in the absence of suitable environmental cues. So, for example, a field with grass in which to forage. If the animal still shows that behavior, we can also rule out the behavior being solely environmentally cued. So, with a physiologic drive and an environmental motivator both being ruled out, it's more likely the behavior is intrinsically motivated. Third, we have willingness to work. This measures the strength of motivation by the trade-offs that birds are willing to make in order to be able to perform this behavior. If birds will pay a cost by expending extra energy, using more time, or experiencing something unpleasant in order to gain access to something that enables them to perform this behavior, we can say that it's relatively important to them. And finally, emotion. If the behavior is associated with positive affect, then performing it feels good. Or if not being able to perform the behavior is associated with negative affect, not being able to perform it feels bad, then these are indicators of the motivational system that underlies an intrinsically motivated behavior. Now I will go through a few examples of different behaviors that may be motivated behaviors in a variety of poultry species. I will start with foraging, which is a food-searching behavior demonstrated by chickens, including layers and broilers, and turkeys. This short video shows a chicken who is foraging as it pecks at the ground and scratches, searching for food. Foraging can be described as a behavior that is persistent in captivity because animals will spend a significant amount of time on it even when they already have food accessible. Turkeys will spend about 7% of their time budget on it, broilers will spend 15 to 20%, and laying hens can spend up to 40% of their time foraging. This indicates that even though the animals are not getting any food from this behavior, even though they're not contributing to their survival in any way or fulfilling a hunger drive, as that's already fulfilled for them, they're still motivated to perform this behavior. They still want to do it, and they still show it. Contra freeloading is a similar concept. Both broilers and laying hens will choose to obtain some feed via foraging, even when other feed is freely accessible, say in an open bowl. This means that they're choosing a feed source that actually requires more effort as opposed to one that's easier. This demonstrates that they have a motivation both for the foraging behavior itself as well as for food. In terms of vacuum behaviors, we can see in many poultry species that birds will show inappropriate redirected foraging motivations to incorrect substrates, such as the feathers of other birds. Broiler breeders, laying hens, and turkeys all demonstrate severe feather pecking behavior in which they peck at and even pull out the feathers of other birds, which may be related to redirecting foraging motivation. If birds are provided with increased opportunities to forage, we can see that this feather pecking behavior will sometimes decrease. Additionally, the movements that are performed in feather pecking and in foraging are very similar, indicating that they may be due to the same motivation. Laying hens show a willingness to pay a cost in order to access foraging substrate. This is known as cost inelasticity because the birds will spend the same amount of time foraging if they need to pay a cost and if they don't. And in this case, the cost that they were willing to pay is squeezing through a very small gap in order to access the substrate. This is uncomfortable and effortful for the birds, but their motivation to forage still persisted. Finally, the ability to forage affects emotion in chickens. Broilers demonstrate more comfort and active behaviors when they're able to forage, which demonstrates that this behavior may be associated with positive affective states. It might feel good. Laying hens with access to litter showed reduced fearfulness, and this can indicate that the birds are experiencing fewer negative affective states when they're able to perform this important behavior. The next example is dust bathing. This is a feather maintenance behavior used to distribute oils on feathers. Here you can see a bird dust bathing as it shakes dust over its feathers, fluffing the feathers and moving its body. This behavior is persistent because even though the function is to distribute oils over the feathers in order to maintain them and keep them healthy, birds will still perform it even if they don't produce any oil because the preen gland, the uropygial gland that produces that oil, has been removed, or when they don't have any feathers. So again, that would be when they're not able to distribute oil over their feathers, they still show a motivation to perform the behavior. So we can say that the motivation isn't related to the sensation of oil on the feathers, but rather something about the dust bathing behavior itself. Vacuum dust bathing behavior is one of the most classic examples of vacuum behavior known to the literature. Laying hens will demonstrate sham or vacuum dust bathing on non-dusty surfaces if they have no access to a dust bath, and sometimes even if they do. This may be if it's too crowded or if they can't access it. While the exact same behavioral patterns are performed, such as scratching, fluffing the feathers, and shaking the wings, no dust actually moves through the feathers. However, this does not appear to reduce the motivation to dust bathe. Hens will still perform just as much dust bathing after gaining access to a substrate if they have recently sham dust bathed or not. This may be because the tactile stimuli are not the same without the dust, or it may be related to the actual function of dust bathing, which is to distribute the lipids over the feathers. Moving on. In terms of willingness to pay a cost, laying hens will work to access a dust bathing substrate. They'll push a door with weights, so they'll expend energy in order to access that substrate, and it can also be used as a positive training tool in order to teach hens how to run through a maze. This shows that access to a dust bathing substrate is a reinforcer that may be associated with positive motivational aspects in these birds. Finally, in terms of emotions, laying hens show elevated corticosterone levels when they're deprived from accessing dust bathing substrate. Additionally, they show increased frustration calls. Corticosterone is a stress hormone that indicates a fight or flight response. Therefore, when the bird is not able to dust bathe, it's more stressed. It's also more frustrated, as indicated by those calls. The calls are performed similarly as to when the birds are blocked from accessing food, showing that the bird may be experiencing a similar negative state. In broiler chickens, access to dust baths reduces fearfulness. This means that it's associated with lower negative affective states in broilers. Finally, we have perching, which is the last example. This is an elevated resting or roosting behavior used to provide security from predators in natural environments. And this short video shows a bird sitting on a tree branch. This behavior is persistent in captive environments. Both laying hens and broiler chickens will show high use of perches and platforms, even though there's no predators that they need to rest safely away from. This graph is data that was collected from a study that I participated in, and it shows the use of platforms by broiler chickens from weeks 0 to 6 of age. And from this, you can see in the blue area that use increased over time to 6 weeks of age, up to 100% of the surface area of the platform being covered by birds. Therefore, it would appear that the birds are indeed very motivated to access this resource. I'm skipping over vacuum behaviors here because it doesn't necessarily make sense to consider that a bird could perch in the absence of an elevated surface to perch on. However, they do show a willingness to pay a cost in order to access resources on which to perch. Laying hens will push a door, expending extra effort to access the perches, particularly at night when they would typically roost away from predators. Perching itself may also be effortful, representing that cost that the birds need to pay, particularly for broilers. Broilers are typically given platform perches as these are more stable for the birds to sit on. They have to access the platform via a ramp, as you can see in this small picture here. Climbing up the ramp represents a significant effort, especially for the broilers, which typically have more gait and lameness issues than do laying hens. However, we still see very high use of perches, as noted on the previous slide. In terms of emotions, birds may feel more safe when they are able to access perches. Laying hens show decreased fear and anxiety when they're caged with perches, and free-range layers show less aggression. So we see that being able to perch can decrease negative affective states in laying hens. Broilers similarly showed more comfort behaviors when they're housed with platforms. This can indicate that broilers feel more comfortable and safe when they have something to perch on. Platforms also tended to decrease fear in commercial broiler chickens. In summary, motivated behaviors are a result of survival pressures during evolution. However, this doesn't mean that they're not still relevant to welfare today. In fact, they can still have a strong impact on the effective states and welfare of many poultry species. Motivated behaviors include foraging, dust bathing, perching, and more that I didn't have time to get into. The ability to perform motivated behaviors is important to welfare because performing the behaviors may bring positive affective states to the birds, while not being able to perform them can lead to negative affective states. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I will now take any questions.